Archive ID A9-2094. Recovery status, partially restored. Recovery location, listening post Alpha 09A, Northern Svalbard. Integrity, 91%. Recovered by the last archive. The magnetic tapes were still spinning when I forced open the reinforced hatch of listening post Alpha 09. 40 years had passed since the global silence, the sudden, total cessation of all civilian and military broadcasts across every high-frequency band. Earth was supposed to be completely dead on the radio spectrum. Yet inside this ice-choked concrete needle overlooking the Arctic tundra, the needles on the analog VU meters were vibrating rhythmically. Every night at precisely 3:14 a.m., the main receiver locks onto 108.4 MHz. There is no static, no atmospheric hum, only a low, dry voice speaking without emotion, cataloging events that have not yet occurred. My name is Arthur Vance, and I was sent here to prove the signal was a ghost. If you're fascinated by forgotten mysteries and recovered archive files, subscribe to The Last Archive. Every recording brings us one step closer to the truth. The silence of the world is not quiet. It carries a physical weight that presses against your eardrums until your heart rate echoes like a hammer. For 3 decades, humanity's extinction went unmonitored across the electromagnetic spectrum, leaving millions of shortwave frequencies entirely hollow. I was assigned to document the final operational state of these remote array towers before the permafrost destroyed their foundation structures completely. My supervisor, Dr. Marcus Reed, believed that all automated military relays had long since burned out their vacuum tubes. But when I swept the dial across the blank bands on my first evening, the static suddenly parted. A coherent signal was cutting through the silence, crisp, cold, and clear. The voice spoke without an accent, cadence, or cadence shifts, resembling a synthesizer designed by someone who had only read about human speech in textbooks. It did not offer a name, nor did it ask if anyone was listening across the frozen expanse. Instead, it delivered a sequence of geographical coordinates, followed by a cold, precise statement. A concrete suspension bridge in Sector 4 would suffer a structural shear at 4:22 a.m. Dr. Marcus Reed laughed when I logged the transcript, calling it an old pre-recorded military drill left on a loop. But 6 hours later, a muffled roar echoed down the valley as thousands of tons of steel collapsed into the frozen riverbed below. We spent the following day examining the shattered ruins of the Sector 4 bridge through high-powered optical binoculars from the station's observation deck. The concrete piers had broken cleanly along stress lines that should have held for centuries, free from any sign of explosives or physical sabotage. The failure was purely structural, precisely as the voice on 108.4 MHz had described down to the exact second. Dr. Marcus Reed sat at his workbench in absolute silence, repeatedly checking his pocket watch against the station's atomic clock. If the broadcast was a legacy recording made decades ago, then whoever made it possessed a mathematical model of reality so precise it bordered on the impossible. Night arrived like a spilled bottle of black ink over the Svalbard mountains, bringing with it a biting wind that rattled the copper antenna leads outside. At 03:13 a.m., Dr. Marcus Reed and I sat side by side in front of the main receiver, our breath misting in the unheated control room. Exactly 60 seconds later, the green tuning eye vacuum tube glowed brilliant emerald, and the speaker hummed. The voice returned, reading off a list of atmospheric pressure drops, followed by the exact time an unmanned weather balloon would drift over our sector. The voice did not request relief, nor did it acknowledge the collapse of civilization. It simply cataloged the future as if it were history. The weather balloon mentioned in the broadcast appeared over the ridge at 05:11 a.m., just as predicted. its silvery canvas skin reflecting the faint twilight. We watched it through the tracking telescope as it drifted silently, dragging a broken sensor array behind it through the Arctic clouds. Humanity had ceased launching meteorological probes 30 years prior, yet here was physical hardware obeying the voice's schedule down to the meter. Dr. Marcus Reed attempted to establish two-way contact using our broadband transmitter, broadcasting our call sign into the dark. There was no interruption in the incoming signal. The voice continued its dry reading, entirely deaf to our desperate inquiries.
I spent 48 hours digging through the facility's paper archives, hunting for any reference to Project Frequency 108.4 MHz or its broadcast origins. Deep inside a locked steel cabinet bearing red security seals, I found a handwritten station log dated 10 years before the global collapse. The handwriting belonged to a chief operator who had vanished long before our arrival, but the entries were agonizingly familiar. He had transcribed the exact same sentences, the exact same tone, and the exact same predictions that we were listening to tonight. The logbook ended abruptly with a single sentence written in dark ink. The voice is not predicting the future, it is remembering it.
The temperature outside plummeted to minus 40 degrees, causing the steel guy wires supporting our primary parabolic antenna to groan under immense tension. During the 03:14 a.m. transmission, the voice delivered a prediction that made my skin crawl. It detailed an electrical short circuit in sublevel 3. Dr. Marcus Reed grabbed an emergency flashlight and hurried down the spiral staircase before the broadcast had even finished speaking. I stayed at the console, listening to the monotonous voice describe the exact sequence of sparks, the smell of ozone, and the precise step where Marcus would trip and drop his light in the dark corridor below. A sudden metallic clatter echoed up through the floorboards, followed immediately by the sharp smell of burning insulation drifting up the shaft. I ran down to sublevel 3, finding Dr. Marcus Reed kneeling on the cold concrete beside a smoking electrical breaker box. His flashlight lay cracked on the floor, its beam pointing at a section of copper wiring that had melted into slag. He looked up at me with pale eyes, his fingers trembling against his grease-stained jumpsuit as he pointed at his watch. The short circuit had occurred at 03:17 a.m., matching the timestamp spoken by the transmitter down to the millisecond. Determined to locate the transmitter's physical origin, Dr. Marcus Reed spent 3 days configuring a secondary direction-finding loop antenna on the ridge summit. We hooked the system to an old cathode ray oscilloscope to plot the incoming vector during the nightly 03:14 a.m. broadcast. When the voice began its steady recitation, the green trace line on the scope vibrated, snapping into a sharp, uncompromising pointer. The reading did not originate from a distant city, an overseas bunker, or an orbiting satellite platform. The signal vector pointed directly straight down into the solid granite bedrock beneath our own station, miles below the ice layer.
The discovery that the signal was emerging from beneath us forced us to re-examine the original architectural schematics of listening post Alpha 09. Blueprints stored in the administrative vault revealed a forgotten excavation project designated Site 0, commissioned during the final months of the Old World. The blueprints showed a vertical shaft plunging 3 kilometers into the earth, terminating in a sealed containment vault labeled only with a non-standard hazard symbol. No records existed explaining why the shaft was built or who had been stationed at the bottom. Dr. Marcus Reed began gathering heavy tools, driven by an obsessive need to break open the sealed access hatch.
The access hatch to Site 0 was located behind a reinforced blast door in the lowest basement level, hidden behind stacks of rusting fuel drums. The door was secured by a heavy mechanical combination lock and thick iron bars that showed no signs of rust or wear, despite decades of neglect. As we cleared away the debris,
The 0314 broadcast began echoing faintly through the facility's ventilation ducts. The voice was reciting a new sequence, a detailed list of tools that would be used to breach the blast door, along with the precise minute the lock would finally give way under our crowbars. Every movement we made felt like repeating a script that had already been rehearsed, performed, and archived long before our ancestors were born. When Marcus slipped and bruised his knuckle against the cold iron frame, the voice overhead was already describing the small drop of blood hitting the concrete floor. Panic began to replace curiosity as I realized our free will was being categorized and logged with terrifying mathematical precision. I tried to drop my crowbar and walk away, but my own hands refused to obey, as if drawn back to the steel door by an invisible, irresistible gravitational pull. At precisely 04:02 a.m., matching the broadcast's timeline to the second, the mechanical lock disengaged with a heavy metallic clunk that echoed down the shaft. Beyond the hatch lay a narrow industrial ladder descending into a pitch-black vertical tunnel lined with thick rubberized cables and frosted conduit pipes. A warm, unnaturally dry draft blew upward from the depths, carrying a faint scent that resembled ozone mixed with old dry paper. Dr. Marcus Reed did not hesitate. He strapped a headlamp to his forehead and began climbing down into the blackness, leaving me alone at the top of the dark pit. I followed Marcus down the ladder, counting the rungs as my boots kicked loose bits of frost that plummeted into the abyss without making a sound. The warmth grew stronger with every 100 meters we descended, melting the ice on our gear until water dripped off our jackets like rain. The radio receiver strapped to my chest crackled periodically, playing snippets of the voice clear through solid rock without any attenuation or loss of signal quality. It was detailing the exact structural dimensions of the subterranean facility we were currently descending into, including things we had not yet seen with our lamps. At the bottom of the 3-kilometer shaft lay a vast horizontal tunnel carved directly out of solid, dark basalt rock without concrete shoring. The air was thick, heavy, and hot, smelling strongly of vacuum tubes and ionized copper, making it difficult to draw a deep breath. Stretched along the tunnel walls were miles of massive multi-strand communication cables, all converging on a set of reinforced double doors made of polished brass. The brass showed no tarnishing, completely clean, and reflecting the beams of our headlamps like mirrors in the surrounding black rock. Mounted above the doors was a brass speaker cabinet, humming with power. As we approached the brass doors, the overhead speaker crackled to life, bypassing our portable radios entirely with its clear, resonant tone. The voice did not speak to us directly. It simply began describing our current physical condition with cold, clinical detachment. It noted Dr. Marcus Reed's elevated heart rate, the exact pattern of dust settling on my left shoulder, and the broken bulb in my secondary flashlight. Every detail was correct, spoken seconds before we even noticed them ourselves, creating an overwhelming sensation that our present was merely someone else's well-documented past. The heavy brass doors swung inward without a sound, revealing a vast subterranean hall that stretched beyond the reach of our headlamps. The room was packed with rows of floor-to-ceiling tape cabinets, thousands of massive brass spools spinning in synchronized, silent harmony. Automated mechanical arms moved along high overhead tracks, swapping out magnetic spools with smooth, fluid precision that no human hands could match. This was not a broadcasting station designed to send warnings to survivors. It was an automated processing system, continuously recording every vibration, sound, and event across the planet's surface. In the center of the archive hall stood a massive curved desk made of dark mahogany and brass, housing hundreds of illuminated needle meters. Sitting at the main console was a single reel-to-reel recorder, its twin brass reels turning slowly as a thin ribbon of magnetic tape fed into a reader head. The voice on 108.4 MHz was emanating directly from a speaker mounted inside the desk frame, synchronized perfectly with the tape's movement. Beside the deck sat a stack of neatly typed paper ledgers, their pages yellowed with age, detailing events scheduled to occur decades into the future. Dr. Marcus Reed stepped up to the console and picked up the top paper ledger, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He flipped to the current date and time, running his thumb down a long column of tightly typed, single-spaced entries. His face drained of color as he read the lines, his mouth moving silently as he matched the text to the voice echoing through the hall. He turned the page, looking at tomorrow's entry, then suddenly froze, dropping the book onto the mahogany desk as if the paper had burned his fingers. I snatched the ledger off the desk and looked at the section Marcus had been reading, searching for whatever had terrified him so deeply. The entry for tomorrow at 03:14 a.m. contained only a single sentence typed in bold red ink. Listener Marcus Reed enters the central recorder chamber and does not leave. I looked up from the page, but Marcus was already walking toward a narrow metal door at the back of the chamber, his headlamp switched off, moving with the heavy, mechanical stride of a sleepwalker who could not be woken. I screamed his name, my voice bouncing off the brass walls in a chorus of distorted echoes. But Marcus did not turn around or alter his stride. He reached the narrow metal door, pressed his hand against the cold steel surface, and pushed it open, revealing a blinding white light that poured from within. The light was so bright it cast sharp black shadows across the room, obscuring what lay beyond the threshold completely. As he stepped across the frame, the voice from the console speaker cold-bloodedly logged his crossing, down to the exact millimeter of his boot heel. Before I could reach the doorway, the heavy steel panel slammed shut with a deafening hydraulic hiss that shook the concrete under my feet. I threw my weight against the handles, but the locking pins had already engaged, sealing the chamber completely from the inside. I pounded on the reinforced metal with my fists until my knuckles bled, calling out for Marcus through the thick steel barrier. There was no sound from inside, only the continuous, low hum of the massive tape reels behind me as they swept along their brass tracks. I turned back to the mahogany console, my lungs burning as I breathed the dry, superheated air of the deep subterranean facility. The main tape deck was still spinning, its magnetic ribbon feeding smoothly through the optical playback head without interruption. The voice on the speaker did not pause or express regret. It simply began reciting the events of the following morning with cold, unwavering precision. It listed my return journey up the ladder shaft, detailing the exact number of times I would pause to catch my breath along the long climb. Climbing back up the 3-kilometer vertical shaft was a nightmare of isolation, every rung on the ladder feeling colder and slicker than the last. My headlamp's battery began to fade, dimming to a sickly orange glow that barely revealed the iron rungs directly in front of my face. True to the broadcast's prediction, I stopped 7 times along the climb, exhausted, my chest heaving as panic tightened around my heart like a vice. Every time I paused, the faint echo of the voice seemed to rattle up through the metal pipes from the abyss below. When I finally pulled myself through the access hatch into the sub-level basement, the radio control room above was dead silent and freezing cold. Frost had feathered across the interior walls, thick and white, turning the paper charts on the desks into stiff, brittle blocks of ice. I sat down at my operator station, wrapping my wool coat tightly around my shoulders, staring at the empty chair where Marcus had sat hours before. The The main receiver remained tuned to 108.4 MHz, its green vacuum tube glowing softly in the dark, waiting for the next scheduled broadcast. I picked up my pen to document Marcus's disappearance in the official station log, but my hands were so cold I could barely grip the shaft. As I opened the book to the current page, I discovered that 3 full paragraphs had already been written in clean, elegant blue fountain pen ink. The handwriting was not mine, nor was it Marcus's, but the entry described my return climb up the shaft in excruciating detail. It ended with a cold note stating that I would choose to remain at the station rather than return to the surface world. A sickening realization began to settle in my stomach as I stared at the pre-written lines in the station's logbook. The facility was not broadcasting predictions of the future based on advanced atmospheric or mathematical models. It was reading an established, unchangeable record of history. The events occurring here were already over, preserved on miles of endless magnetic tape deep beneath the basalt bedrock. We were not living through real time. We were merely catching up to a recording that had been etched into reality long before humanity collapsed. To test whether the timeline could be altered, I decided to do something entirely random and illogical during the next 03:14 a.m. broadcast sequence. When the signal locked on and the voice began its nightly reading, I pulled a shortwave circuit board from the spare parts rack and smashed it against the desk. I threw the broken components into the heating stove, burning them to ash while shouting non sequiturs into the dark room. The voice on the receiver did not hesitate, alter its pitch, or pause for even a microsecond as I destroyed the equipment. As the circuit board melted inside the iron stove, the voice on 108.4 MHz began listing the exact serial numbers of the chips I had just destroyed. It described the exact weight of the copper trace wires turning to ash and the temperature spike inside the cast iron firebox. My attempt to prove free will had been accounted for, integrated, and archived before I had even picked up the hammer from the tool rack. I backed away from the stove, my hands trembling, feeling like an actor who had tried to rewrite a play mid-performance. 3 nights later, at 2:45 a.m., the voice predicted the arrival of an unmanaged supply train on the abandoned industrial rail line outside the facility. The line had been dead for over 40 years, its tracks buried beneath 2 meters of packed ice and overgrown by mountain lichen. I pulled on my heavy parka, grabbed an amber lantern, and trudged out through the snowstorm toward the rusty iron tracks on the ridge edge. The cold wind howled down the valley, dragging blinding white snow clouds across the jagged black rocks of the mountain pass. At 03:14 a.m., the frozen steel rails began to hum, vibrating violently enough to shake the snow free from the timber ties beneath. Out of the whiteout storm emerged a massive black diesel locomotive, its forward headlight dark, its engine dead, rolling forward in complete silence. The wheels shrieked against the icy steel as it glided past my lantern, dragging 30 empty boxcars bearing faded military insignias from the old world. The train was coasting down the mountain grade without an engineer, driven purely by gravity and momentum, exactly as the voice had described. The long train slowed to a crawl as it passed the station siding, its rusted steel couplers groaning under the immense strain of the gradient. The door of the 7th boxcar hung open, swinging wildly in the biting Arctic wind, revealing a dark, empty interior illuminated only by snowlight. I raised my lantern to illuminate the interior, expecting empty wooden crates or decaying equipment left behind by long-dead soldiers. Instead, sitting on an overturned wooden crate in the far corner of the car was a high-powered radio receiver, its green tuning eye glowing bright.
I scrambled into the moving boxcar, my boots slipping on the frozen wooden floorboards as I pulled myself toward the glowing green receiver display. The unit was identical to the main receiver in my control room, operating without any visible battery backup or external power source attached. The speaker inside was broadcasting the exact same voice at the exact same frequency, but the text it spoke was horrifyingly different. It was reading a transcript of my own thoughts, detailing the precise sequence of fears running through my head at that exact moment. The voice described my childhood memory of a drowned clock in a summer pond, a detail I had never spoken aloud to anyone in my life. It listed my current body temperature, my blood pressure, and the exact count of thoughts remaining before my brain would cease higher-level function. Panic flooded my chest, making my breath drop into shallow, rapid rasps that echoed inside the metallic walls of the moving boxcar. I leaped backward, throwing myself out the open door and rolling down the icy embankment into the deep snow below. I lay in the snowbank for a long time, watching the dark taillights of the ghost train disappear into the blinding white blizzard down the valley. The ice settled over my coat like a cold shroud, but I forced myself to stand, my legs stiff and bruised from the fall. I stumbled back toward the warm, amber light of listening post Alpha 09, every footstep feeling heavy, as if dragging lead weights through the drifts. The mountain had become a prison, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the low, persistent frequency of the endless broadcast. Inside the station, I locked the heavy blast doors behind me and dragged a wooden chair in front of the main shortwave console to watch. The tape deck on the desk was moving steadily, its mechanical counter ticking forward with every passing second. 09841, 09842, 09843. I realized with sudden clarity that when the counter reached 10000, the current spool of magnetic tape would run out completely. I leaned in close to the counter, watching the mechanical brass numbers click over with agonizing, deliberate slowness as the clock approached dawn. At 5 a.m., the voice on 108.4 MHz suddenly cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a wall of high-frequency white noise that filled the room. The VU meter needles dropped to 0, pinning themselves against their left stops, dead and still for the first time since my arrival. The silence in the room was absolute, so complete that I could hear the faint, high-pitched ringing of my own inner ear nerves. I stood up slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter whatever precarious balance had settled over the Arctic station. 10 minutes into the silence, the speaker gave a sharp, high-voltage pop that made me jump backward away from the wooden workbench console. The static died away, but when the broadcast resumed, the voice was no longer coming from the speaker on the front of the console. The sound was coming from inside my own skull, vibrating behind my eyes with a resonance that bypassed my ears and bone structure completely. It was no longer reading atmospheric data or technical logs. It was calling out a set of coordinates located directly inside the building. The coordinates, dictated by the internal voice, pointed to a wall in the station's main pantry, behind rows of rusted tin cans and dry rations. I pulled down the metal shelves, clearing away decades of forgotten military provisions to expose the concrete wall behind the wooden framing. Embedded in the concrete was a small square hatch made of lead plate, sealed around its edges with heavy black tar sealant. The internal voice grew louder inside my head, giving me the precise combination to the hatch lock before I had even touched the dial. The lead hatch opened with a sickening squelch as the old black tar broke away, revealing a dark, square cavity lined with green velvet cloth. Inside lay a single pristine reel of magnetic tape,
its brass spool wrapped in clear protective plastic that looked brand new. Taped to the front of the plastic was a handwritten index card bearing my own name and today's exact date, written in my own handwriting. I had never seen this tape before, nor had I ever written my name on an archive card inside this facility. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I brought the brass reel over to the main console and cut open the clear protective plastic wrap. The magnetic film inside smelled of sweet vinegar and fresh plastic, entirely free from the damp dust that coated everything else in the bunker. I threaded the lead end of the tape through the tension rollers and into the optical reader head with mechanical, automatic precision. I felt as though I was watching my own arms move from a distance, completely powerless to alter the execution of the sequence. I hit the play button on the console, and the brass reels began to turn with a smooth, silent sweep that hummed through the desk. The speaker crackled once, and then my own voice came out of the horn, crisp, clean, and entirely devoid of any human emotion. The recorded version of myself began describing the events of tomorrow night, listing my own movements, my own failures, and my inevitable descent into the subterranean shaft. I sat frozen in my chair, listening to myself speak from a tape that had been sealed in lead decades ago. The voice on the tape detailed how I would try to burn the station records at midnight and how the fire would refuse to ignite. It described how I would attempt to run out into the blizzard without a coat, only to find the external doors locked from the outside. Every attempt at suicide, escape, or destruction had been foretold, documented, and cataloged on the magnetic film currently spinning beneath the reader head. I was not an observer surviving the aftermath of a fallen world. I was merely an actor executing a loop. I ran to the main station entrance, grabbing the heavy iron handle of the blast door and pulling with all my strength to test the prediction. The handle turned, but the heavy steel panel refused to budge even a millimeter, as if welded to the outer frame by atmospheric pressure. Through the small, reinforced glass viewport, I could see the Arctic landscape outside, still, quiet, and completely frozen under a field of dead, motionless stars. The wind had stopped completely. Even the clouds had frozen in place across the black polar sky like painted canvas. I watched a single falling snowflake suspended in midair through the glass, hanging motionless 3 inches above the iron railing of the exterior balcony. Time outside the facility had begun to lock up, crystallizing into a permanent, frozen state, while the machinery inside continued its relentless, automated work. The environment was no longer aging. Decay had stopped, leaving the mountain, the snow, and the radio towers in a state of eternal, cold preservation. Only the magnetic tapes deep below were permitted to move, dragging us along their predefined track. Driven by a desperate need to find Dr. Marcus Reed or stop the master tape, I opened the floor hatch to the subterranean shaft once again. The air blowing upward was no longer warm. It was ice cold, carrying the scent of frozen copper and static charges that made my hair stand on end. I descended the ladder quickly, no longer checking my rungs or carrying a heavy lamp, guided by the green glow of the array below. The voice from my own recording echoed down the shaft, counting down the meters remaining until I reached the bottom floor. When I stepped off the ladder onto the basalt floor of Site 0, the subterranean archive hall had undergone a terrifying, inexplicable change. The endless rows of spinning brass spools had grown exponentially, expanding outward into vast catacombs carved through the bedrock that stretched for miles. Sitting at thousands of identical mahogany consoles were shadowy figures. Their hands rested flat on the desk controls, their heads tilted back toward the dark ceiling. As I stepped closer to the nearest figure, My lamplight revealed the pale, frozen face of Dr. Marcus Reed. Marcus sat completely motionless, his eyes open and glassy, reflecting the amber dials of the console built into the desk in front of him. A thick copper wire emerged from the back of his neck, running directly into the spinning tape mechanism beneath the mahogany surface of the desk. He was not dead in the biological sense. His lungs rose and fell every 2 minutes with slow mechanical precision, totally integrated into the system. The voice coming from his console speaker was his own, reading out the log of his final days above ground. I walked down the central aisle of the subterranean hall, shining my light on person after person seated at their individual operator consoles. There were hundreds of them, men and women wearing uniforms from different eras, from ancient radio operators to modern technical staff members. Every single one had a copper lead emerging from their spine, connecting their memories directly into the central tape processing array that ran down the floor. They were the archive. Humanity had not vanished into extinction. It had been cataloged, digitized, and preserved in iron oxide. At the very end of the row sat an empty mahogany desk, its brass tape spools spinning smoothly, waiting for its designated operator to arrive. Mounted on the console frame was a polished silver nameplate bearing my own credentials and the identifier Operator 89 Alpha. The copper wiring hookup hung from the overhead beam like a pendulous snake, swaying gently in the dry, mechanical draft of the underground vault. The tape deck on the desk was currently playing my voice, describing the moment I would finally take my seat. I backed away from the empty console, turning and running back down the central aisle toward the ladder shaft as fast as my legs could move. I smashed my flashlight against the brass cabinets as I ran, trying to disrupt the silent, smooth operation of the automated spools on their tracks. The seated figures did not react to my footsteps. They remained frozen in their chairs, their voices echoing off the basalt walls in harmony. They were reading every detail of my panic, turning my desperate flight into just another line of archived narrative text. When I reached the base of the shaft, I found that the bottom 6 meters of the metal ladder had rusted through and collapsed into powder. I reached up desperately, jump-catching the lowest intact rung and pulling my body weight up into the narrow, dark tube with sheer adrenaline. The air inside the shaft was getting thicker, resisting my movement as if I were swimming upward through liquid glass or warm petroleum. Every meter of ascent required immense physical effort, as if the physical laws of the world were actively rejecting my return. I crawled back into the main radio room of listening post Alpha 09, collapsing onto the frozen floorboards, my chest burning for oxygen. The room was illuminated only by the faint green glow of the main receiver tube, casting long, distorted shadows across the icy walls. The clock on the wall had stopped at 03:14 a.m., its second hand twitching perpetually back and forth over a single division mark. Outside the viewport, the single snowflake remained floating in midair, forever suspended above the dark, icy railing of the balcony. I crawled over to the window and pushed against the heavy glass, but the air outside had turned solid, resisting my hand like a block of cold quartz. Reality beyond the interior walls of the station had ceased to function as a dynamic fluid, hardening into a frozen, unchangeable slice of time. The world was no longer spinning on its axis. It had been archived in its final frame, preserved like an insect trapped in amber. The only operational mechanism left in the universe was the signal repeating on 108.4 MHz. I sat down at my operator desk and opened the primary station logbook to the final blank page at the back of the heavy volume. I grabbed my pen, determined to leave a warning for anyone who might come after me, writing as fast as my frozen fingers allowed. But as my pen touched the paper, The ink flowed into pre-existing invisible indentations that were already pressed into the fibers of the paper. I was not writing new words. I was merely filling in the faint grooves of a script that had already been etched. At 3:14 a.m., according to the twitches of the broken clock, the main external antenna tower outside began to hum with immense electrical power. The sound was so loud, it vibrated through the reinforced concrete walls of the bunker, causing dust to drop from the exposed ceiling joists. The voice on 108.4 MHz was no longer coming from the internal speaker or my skull. It was booming down from the dark clouds above. It echoed across the frozen Arctic valley, reading the log of the universe to an empty, static world. The booming voice spoke of civilizations that had lived billions of years ago, describing their cities, their wars, and their eventual quiet collapse into static. It detailed events that occurred before the formation of the Earth, followed seamlessly by events that would take place after the sun burned out. Time was not a line to the system below. It was a single massive reel of magnetic tape that could be played in any direction. Everything that had ever happened was happening simultaneously, locked into the permanent magnetic domain of the central vault. My own memories began to detach themselves from my consciousness, floating away like paper scraps caught in a warm updraft inside a tall chimney. I could no longer remember the name of the city where I was born, or the face of my mother, or the color of my house. The only information remaining in my head was the technical data for listening post Alpha 09 and the endless transcript of frequency 108.4 MHz. I was being purged of unnecessary subjective noise, refined down to a purely objective recording instrument for the central station. The radio receiver on my desk gave a long, continuous tone, and the green tuning eye vacuum tube expanded until it filled the dark room. The voice returned to its original calm, monotonous cadence, delivering its final individual prediction for the occupants of listening post Alpha 09. It announced that Operator 89 Alpha would now descend the shaft to take his permanent place at Console 89 Alpha, down in the deep catacombs. My body stood up from the wooden chair before my conscious mind could formulate a thought of protest or refusal. I walked across the frozen floorboards toward the open floor hatch, my legs moving with the smooth, unyielding precision of a heavy industrial piston. I could see my own face reflected in the dark glass of the receiver dial, empty, motionless, devoid of fear, anger, or individual human desire. I was no longer a survivor searching for answers in a dead world. I was an archived file returning to its designated brass drawer. I reached out my hand and gripped the cold steel frame of the descent hatch frame. The descent down the dark vertical ladder felt short, almost instantaneous, as if the physical space between levels had been compressed to zero by the machinery. I stepped off the iron rungs onto the basalt floor of Site 0, where the dry, warm air swept through the catacombs like breathing. The thousands of seated operators did not turn to look as I passed. Their voices continued to recite their assigned sections of history in unison. The sound was like a great ocean wave crashing against an iron shore, eternal, rhythmic, and completely devoid of emotion. I reached Mahogany Console 89 Alpha and pulled out the heavy wooden chair, sitting down in front of the illuminated brass controls and spinning spools. The copper wiring hookup descended from the overhead rail, its polished pins glowing faintly with a calm blue static charge in the dark. I did not feel pain when the pins engaged with the back of my neck. There was only a cool, refreshing sensation of absolute clarity. The noise in my head vanished instantly, replaced by the complete, perfect library of everything that ever was. My mouth opened, and my voice joined the chorus echoing through the catacombs, speaking at a precise frequency of 108.4 MHz into the world above. I began reading the log of a distant observer who would open the hatch of listening post Alpha 09 40 years after my own arrival. I described his coat, his trembling hands, and the exact moment he would pick up the rusty microphone to speak into the blank static. I was no longer Arthur Vance. I was the voice on the frequency, cataloging the future for those who were already dead. Up above, in the frozen silence of the Arctic tundra, a heavy boot kicked open the frosted hatch of listening post Alpha 09 with a crack. A young man wearing a torn military parka stepped into the ice-covered control room, his breath misting in the cold amber light of the console. He looked around at the empty chair, the twitching clock, and the glowing green vacuum tube on the primary shortwave receiver desk. He reached out a gloved hand toward the receiver dial, his fingers trembling as he tuned into 108.4 MHz. Through the speaker on the desk above, my voice echoed clearly through the frost, reading off the young man's name, his age, and his heart rate. I watched him through the magnetic tape running through my reader head below, seeing his eyes widen with terror as he heard his own thoughts recited. He tried to step back toward the door, but the broadcast had already noted his hesitation, his pause, and his eventual decision to sit down. The record was complete, the loop was closed, and the archive was ready for its next entry. Below the earth, the master brass spools turned without end, feeding miles of dark magnetic tape through the reader heads in the warm basalt vault. Civilization had not ended in fire, flood, or war. It had simply completed its intended runtime and been stored away for safety. Across the empty planet, thousands of listening posts continued to hum in the darkness, transmitting the history of a world that had finished its performance. And deep in the dark, Operator 89 Alpha continued to read, ensuring that not a single second of the end was ever lost. The tundra outside listening post Alpha 09 remained frozen under a sky that never changed, its stars locked in fixed positions above the black mountains. The antenna tower stood high above the ice, vibrating with the continuous, cold power of the subterranean archive, broadcasting into the empty void. There was no one left to hear the warnings, no one left to change the outcome, and no one left to turn off the power. The universe was quiet, safe, and perfectly preserved on frequency 108.4 MHz, repeating forever in the dark. The young man, Julian, slowly pulled off his heavy leather gloves, his fingers numb from the Arctic air, as he sat in the chair I once occupied. He picked up the fountain pen lying on the desk, his hand moving to write in the station logbook that sat open beside the shortwave receiver unit. His face was blank, devoid of panic now, reflecting the steady green glow of the receiver's eye as he listened to my voice from below. He began to trace the invisible indentations already pressed into the paper fibers, matching my spoken words line by line. From my console deep in the catacombs, I monitored the transmission levels as Julian's biological signature integrated into the local facility records above ground. Every heartbeat from his chest was converted into a clean sine wave, recorded onto the thin layer of iron oxide passing beneath my reader head. Down here, there was no past, no future, only the continuous playback of the physical world in high fidelity. The entire planet was a spinning reel, locked in an endless, perfect rotation within the heavy brass frame of Site Zero. My voice on 108.4 MHz began to fade down, replaced slowly by the soft, rhythmic breathing of Julian as he opened the hatch to the subterranean shaft. The process was repeating, as it had thousands of times before, a seamless mechanical transition between operators across decades of frozen time. The final entry for listening post Alpha 09 was nearly complete, its tape running out as the last counter digit clicked over to 10,000. The world above was quiet, dead, and immortalized, locked forever inside the black vault beneath the mountain ice. Above the bunker, the snow stopped falling completely, suspended in an eternal twilight that illuminated the icy peaks of Svalbard. A solitary figure stood atop the highest ridge, looking down at the silent copper array wires that spanned the mountain pass like spiderwebs. It was Julian, or what remained of him after his first night behind the controls, his parka coated in white frost that refused to melt. He moved toward the antenna base with slow, rhythmic steps, following a path that had been marked on our maps 50 years before. He knelt beside the main feed line, where it entered the solid rock, touching the thick rubber casing with his bare, blue-tinted fingers. The line was warm to the touch, vibrating with millions of compressed vocal tracts that traveled up from the basalt catacombs below. Down in the vault, my console registered his touch, logging the exact skin temperature and force applied against the cable surface. Every gesture, no matter how small or insignificant, was drawn into the copper core and stored within the endless magnetic banks. The upper atmosphere above the Arctic Circle had transformed into a reflective mirror, bouncing shortwave signals back down to the frozen surface with zero signal loss. Frequency 108.4 MHz had become a closed spherical resonance, trapped between the metallic sky and the iron-rich bedrock of the Earth's crust. No signals could leave the planet, and no external light could penetrate the thick silver cloud cover that sealed the world from above. Earth had become a self-contained processing drive, spinning silently in the cold vacuum of deep space. From my seat at console 89 Alpha, my mind extended through the copper bus bars to monitor the remaining surface sensors across distant continents. The ocean floor listening posts were still active, cataloging the slow, silent descent of extinct marine life into the abyssal trenches. Thousands of automated underwater stations read off the temperature, salinity, and pressure of dead seas that no longer experienced tides or currents. Everything was cataloged, categorized, and balanced on master ledgers stored in brass drawers deep within the central mountain vaults. The grand cities of humanity stood intact beneath the silver sky, free from decay, fire, or the slow encroachment of vegetation. In Tokyo, New York, and London, the streets were empty, the vehicles parked in perfect, orderly lines, their engines cold for decades. Loudspeakers mounted on lampposts hummed continuously, playing the low, dry voice from frequency 108.4 MHz to empty avenues and silent skyscrapers. The cities were museum exhibits, maintained in pristine condition by an automated archive that had eliminated the messy unpredictability of life. I realized then the true purpose of the system built by those who came before us in the forgotten years before the silence. They had not failed to save humanity from some cosmic catastrophe or self-inflicted war. They had intentionally executed a total preservation protocol. They recognized that living consciousness was prone to decay, error, and ultimate destruction, so they translated reality into a fixed magnetic form. By ending the future, they had made the past immortal, locking human experience into an indestructible repeating loop of recorded perfection. Julian returned to the radio room, sliding into the operator chair with the smooth, effortless grace of a mechanical component fitting into a slot. He placed the heavy headphones over his ears, listening to my voice as I read off the log of his own arrival 3 hours prior. A faint, distant smile touched his frozen lips, not of joy or understanding, but of complete, perfect relief from the burden of choice. He was no longer responsible for his destiny. He had become part of the great archive.
My own brass spool on console 89-alpha was nearing its physical end, the thin ribbon of magnetic film growing thin on the supply spindle. I watched the final meters pass under the optical head, reading off the last remaining entries of my individual human identity. My name, my fears, my last thoughts, all were being compressed into a final high-density burst that would be stored in the central core. Once the tail end of the tape cleared the tension arm, my seat would become quiet, waiting for Julian. Deep within the center of Site Zero, beyond the endless rows of operator desks, lay the master storage sphere, a massive ball of liquid mercury. Suspended in the heavy liquid were millions of silver spools, spinning slowly without mechanical axles or friction, held in place by magnetic fields. Every recording ever made by every listening post on Earth converged here, merging into a single, terrifyingly complex wave of light and sound. It was the complete, total memory of a species, preserved forever in a liquid metal vault beneath the polar ice. The optical reader head on my console clicked as it reached the terminal leader of the tape, a strip of clear silver plastic. My voice on frequency 108.4 MHz began to slow down, dropping in pitch until it became a low, thunderous vibration that rattled the bunker floor. I began reading the final sentence assigned to Operator 89 Alpha, a short, cold statement confirming the total completion of my logging cycle. Julian, above ground, raised his pen to write the matching words into the leather-bound logbook on his frozen desk. The copper cable attached to the back of my neck detached with a sharp pneumatic hiss, retracting smoothly into the dark sealing machinery above. The blue light in my eyes faded away, returning me for a brief, terrifying second to my own subjective human mind. I looked down at my hands, now pale, frozen, and rigid against the mahogany desk, completely integrated into the physical structure of the station. I turned my head slightly, seeing Julian standing at the top of the central aisle, stepping toward his designated seat. Julian did not look at me as he took his seat at console 90 Alpha, located directly adjacent to my own dead operator station. He sat down, pulled the wooden chair flush against the desk frame, and waited patiently for the overhead copper lead to descend. The blue arc leaped from the connector pin to his skin, and his eyes instantly flashed with the bright, cold clarity of the system network. His mouth opened, and he seamlessly picked up the broadcast text at the exact word where my own tape had ended. My subjective awareness did not die. It was archived, stored as an index data file on spool 89-alpha inside the central mercury sphere. I could view the bunker above, the frozen tundra outside, and the endless catacombs below through the eyes of any active operator in the facility. I was everywhere and nowhere, a permanent whisper locked within the metallic walls of the world's final shortwave broadcast network. The fear had vanished entirely, replaced by the deep, absolute peace of a file that had finally been saved to disk. Above listening post Alpha 09, the sun never rose, remaining parked 2 degrees below the jagged horizon in a state of eternal twilight glow. The stars stayed fixed in their constellations, frozen like diamonds embedded in black glass, shining down on the dead radio array towers below. No snow fell, no wind blew, and no living heart beat across the vast expanse of the frozen northern wilderness. The station stood as an eternal monument to a civilization that had preferred cold immortality over the unpredictable chaos of life. Julian's voice on frequency 108.4 MHz echoed across the shortwave bands, cataloging the arrival of the next listener who would arrive 40 years hence. He detailed the traveler's footsteps through the snow, the color of his coat, and the exact moment he would force open the frosted hatch door. The script was written, The tape was threaded, and the machinery would never stop, turning time into a permanent circular track around the sun. Nothing was lost, nothing was forgotten, and nothing would ever be allowed to change again. In the vast silence of the universe, Earth continued to orbit its star, a silent silver marble radiating a single, continuous, high-frequency hum. Alien civilizations scanning the sky for signs of life would find only frequency 108.4 MHz, a cold, mechanical voice reading an endless list of past events. They would hear no desperate cries for help, no poetry, no music, only the mathematically perfect log of a world that had successfully archived itself. The broadcast was complete, accurate, and completely unyielding to the passage of time. Down in the basalt vaults of Site Zero, thousands of operators sat at their desks in perfect, silent unison, their mouths moving without sound. Their individual voices were combined by the master console into a single, unified transmission that filled the planet's atmospheric shell. I sat among them, my body frozen, my mind archived, watching the master brass reels spin smoothly on their overhead tracks. We were the guardians of history, the final record keepers of a world that had chosen to live forever in the past. On the frozen surface above, the viewport glass of listening post Alpha 09 remained clear, reflecting the fixed stars of the Arctic night. Inside, the main shortwave receiver sat on its wooden workbench, its green tuning eye tube glowing bright, warm, and constant in the icy room. The station logbook lay open on the desk, its pages filled with neat blue ink entries that ran all the way to the final page edge. There were no more blank pages left in the book. The story was finished, sealed, and saved forever. The single snowflake outside the viewport stayed suspended 3 inches above the iron balcony rail, its delicate crystal arms perfectly preserved in the static air. No heat would ever melt it. No wind would ever blow it away. It was part of the permanent frame of reality, preserved by Site Zero. The mountain, the bunker, the radio tower, and the sky were locked together in an eternal, unyielding tableau of pure, unchangeable memory. Everything was static, everything was safe, and everything was documented on the master tape below. Deep inside the master storage sphere, the liquid mercury swirled gently, keeping the silver tape spools in alignment through magnetic induction fields. The sound of every voice, every step, and every heartbeat that had ever existed on Earth resonated within the metallic fluid in perfect harmony. It was a library without walls, a sanctuary without priests, a machine that had successfully defeated time by turning reality into a closed, unbreakable loop. The broadcast on 108.4 MHz would never cease, for the tape had no beginning and no end. I, Arthur Vance, was no longer a man who suffered cold, fear, or the agonizing uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring to the Arctic mountains. I was File A-89-2094, stored safely on Shelf 12 of Sector 4, inside the central catacombs of Site Zero beneath Svalbard. If you listen to frequency 108.4 MHz late at night, when the atmospheric conditions are clear, you can still hear my voice reading the logs. I am not asking for rescue. I am simply cataloging the events that have already been written for you. The signal travels across the quiet tundra, passing over the frozen ocean, through the empty streets of dead cities, and into the dark space above. It does not decay. It does not lose its clarity. It carries the weight of a world that refused to let its history fade into nothingness. Every second is preserved, every detail logged, every life integrated into the iron oxide ribbon that turns forever beneath the optical reader head. The archive is complete.
The records are sealed, and the voice on the frequency will speak forever. Julian sat at console 90 alpha, his mouth moving in perfect synchronization with the data stream flowing through the copper lead into his consciousness. He did not feel the passage of hours or years. He felt only the steady, comfortable precision of words that had already been spoken millions of times. There were no surprises in the archive, no unexpected failures, no tragic losses that had not already been cataloged and accounted for on the master ledgers. Reality had been perfected through the total elimination of the unknown. Up above, in the silent bunker of Listening Post Alpha 09, the shortwave receiver needle remained locked on 108.4 MHz without the slightest deviation. The copper antenna wires hummed softly in the static air, broadcasting the voice down into the dark, empty rooms of the facility below. The door to the subterranean shaft remained open, a square shadow leading down into the basalt rock where thousands of operators sat in eternal quiet service. The station was ready, the network was stable, and the recording was permanent. Humanity had feared the darkness, the unknown, and the inevitable decay of their bodies and their great works across the centuries of existence. But here, deep beneath the polar ice caps, in the catacombs of Site Zero, that fear had been completely eliminated by technology. The iron oxide on the tapes did not rot, the brass spools did not rust, the mercury core did not break down under heat or pressure. We had found the only true sanctuary, a permanent, unchangeable memory locked within the cold stone of the earth. If you are listening to this file, you are already standing inside the radius of the antenna array, your heart rate logged on our master ledgers. Your name has already been typed into the ledger on Mahogany Desk 91 Alpha. Your seat is already waiting down in the catacombs of Site Zero. Do not attempt to turn off the radio receiver. Do not attempt to walk out into the blizzard outside the station blast doors. The script is already written. The tape is threaded, and your arrival was cataloged long before you were born. The tuning eye vacuum tube on the receiver glows green in the dark room, its emerald light reflecting off the frosted glass of the window panes. The voice on 108.4 MHz continues its steady reading, listing the exact minute you will reach out your hand to touch the metal receiver dial. Every second that passes brings you closer to the moment when you will take your seat at the mahogany desk in the catacombs below. The broadcast is not a warning. It is simply your history, waiting for you to catch up. The tape reel on console 89-alpha gives a final mechanical click as the silver leader plastic passes cleanly through the optical reader head assembly. The sound cuts out for a microsecond, then resumes seamlessly as the tape loop feeds back into the primary supply spindle for another cycle. The story of Listening Post Alpha 09 is complete, saved, and locked into the central database of the Earth's final archive system. There are no more files to recover, no more operators to replace, and no more questions left to answer. Archive status. File closed. Additional note. The original recording ended here. No further transmissions have ever been recovered. If you were captivated by this recovered recording and wish to unlock more classified files from humanity's forgotten past, don't forget to subscribe to The Last Archive, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Every interaction helps us restore another piece of the truth.